Today's daf we're going to be learning is Avodah Zarah Daf Nun. We're going to start again from the Mishnah at the bottom. We had a machlok at Rabbi Yishmael and the rabbis about markulis. Remember, markulis starts off with 3 stones, 2 next to each other, 1 on top of both of them. We'll see that source today. And then people would throw more stones at it. And now the question is, if you find stones next to the markulis, what is the law? Do we assume that they came from the markulis and they're forbidden? Or do we say, no, they might just be regular random stones? So Rabbi Yishmael says it depends whether we see 3 or whether we see 2. And the rabbi said it depends whether it's close to markulis or not close to markulis. So we were trying to figure out what exactly is the machloket. So the Gemara said we understand the close or not. If it's close, it must have come from there. If it's not close, it must have not come from there. But Rabbi Yishmael, what does Rabbi Yishmael think? So Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Yosef came and said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, in other words, why does 2 or 3 make a difference? So we went through this yesterday, that if you know they fell from the markulis and they came from there, even Rabbi Yishmael agrees it's usher, it doesn't matter how many. And even if you say, Ein Ovdim L'Shvarim, people don't bow down to broken pieces, that's when they're broken. This isn't broken, this is just parts that separated. This, in any case, is all built on separate pieces that if they're separated, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't mean they're really broken. So, ki pligi bistama. Their machloket is, last 3 words on mem ted and bet, the machloket is bistama, meaning we don't know that they came from there. Okay? If it's clear they came from there, clearly it's forbidden. But now we have these stones and we don't know. And mikuravot nami deika lamemra minei nafal. If they're near there, then you can say that they fell from there. Divrei hakol asurot. So if they're close by, and you can definitely say that they fell from there, everyone would agree it's forbidden. Ki pligi b'meruchakot. Okay, but their debate is if they're farther away. And then we're going to understand, we're going to try to figure out what exactly this machloket is. So again, we have the machloket is bistam, where we don't know, and not when we do know. And the machloket is when they're far and not when they're close. So now the Gemara says, wait a minute, how could you say that the machloket is when they're far? Look at the wording of Rabbi Yishmael. V'ha bitzad markulis katani. It said you find it right next to markulis. Sounds like it's right next to there, and it's close. My bitzad arba amot didei. So now they're going to explain that bitzad means, now here there's a big debate. Do we mean right outside 4 amot, right at 4 amot, close to 4 amot? Rashi says it's around 4 amot as opposed to 1.5 amot. Okay, we're going to distinguish. Close means within 1.5 amot, and somewhere between there and 4. And then when you get to close to 4, that's already distance. Okay, so bitzad means distance 4 cubits. 4 cubits is usually the space of a person. It's not very much. But that's enough away that Rabbi Yishmael already is going to say it depends if it's 2 or 3. Now, we still don't really understand what the machloket is. But now we're going to explain. Rabbi Yishmael Saba, Osim markulis katan bitzar markulis gadol. Rabbi Yishmael says like this. Again, if it's very, very close, within 1.5, let's just go with Rashi, then we're going to assume it fell off. But if it's 4 amot away already, or within around 4 amot, we're going to assume that it's its own thing, and it didn't come from there. However, we're still going to assume that it has to do with markulis, because there's 3, one right next to the other. And shalosh dedami the markulis asurot, shtayim mutarot. So 3 are light markulis, because as I mentioned, markulis starts off with 3 stones, and 2 are permitted. And Rabbanan Savre, ein osim markulis katan bitzar markulis gadol, loshna shalosh, loshna shtayim. Nirot imo asurot, she'en nirot imo mutarot. So I think I skipped a few words. Let me just go back. I can't remember if I read them, but Rabbi Yishmael Savar Osim Markulis Katan Bitzar Markulis Gadol. The real debate is it typical that when there's a big markulis, they make a small markulis nearby? And that's why it's not right next to it. So it didn't fall from there, but they built another one right next to it. And since there's 3, that's already could be a markulis, and not just 3 random stones. The rabbis say they don't make markulis a small one next to the big one. That's not something that's typically done. And therefore, if you see 3, it doesn't make a difference. If you see 2, 3, all it depends on is Is it close? Did it come from the original Markulis? But definitely we don't think that they built another mini Markulis next to the other one. Okay, but Rabbi Yishmael says we do think that. So their debate is, number one, it's based on this concept of, do we make a little Markulis next to a big one? And the next to means not right next to, but nearby. So that's how we explain the machloket right now. We're going to a little bit fine-tune this further down the daf. Amar Mar. B'yadua shenashru mimenu divrei hakol asurot. So now we go back again and say, this line we just said before, when they know they fell from there, everybody forbids. Okay? That was in the beginning. We said, everyone agrees that when, right, this is what Rabbi Yochanan said, b'yadua shenashru mimenu, if you know it came from Markulis, everyone's going to forbid it. Right? What they're talking about is when you don't know, b'stama, you don't know. And then, again, we're going to say, if it's very close, we're going to assume it came from there. If it's farther away, we're not going to assume that. But Rabbi Yishmael is going to forbid it if there's three, because I'll assume this was a mini Markulis you put next to the bigger one. But now we're going to question this line. When we know it fell from there, everyone's going to forbid. But look at this Braita, Rimini. In a Braita it says, Avanim shenashru min Markulis. So if there's stones, now note the wording, that fell from Markulis, this sounds like it definitely fell from Markulis. So rabbis stick with their position. If it's visually seen from there, meaning very close, yes. If it's not, not. Now, even though it definitely came from Markulis, right? And Rabbi Yishmael omer shalosh asrot shtayim mutarot. And Rabbi Yishmael again is two no, three yes. But this makes no sense according to what we said. Everybody agrees. If it definitely came from Markulis, it should be a problem. So Amar Rava says you got to change the wording of that Braita. It's clearly a mistake. Lo tema shenashru ela ema shenimtzeu. It's that you find it. Avinim shenimtzeu min Markulis. It's stones that are found near Markulis. That's what we mean. Not that it actually fell from Markulis. Once you know it fell, of course it's forbidden. It's stones that came from Avodah Zarah. Of course they were worshipped. They're forbidden. V'hatanya, another question. Rabbi Yishmael omer. So now, skipped the line. V'sava Rabbi Yishmael shtayim mutarot. Now wait, we just said a minute ago, the Braita said, shalosh asurot shtayim mutarot. And that fits with what we saw Rabbi Yishmael said. So now we have, they're found near Markulis, two, we're going to permit. Is this really true? V'hatanya, doesn't it say in the Braita, Rabbi Yishmael omer. Shtayim b'tfisalo asurot. Shalosh afilu meruchakot asurot. If there's shtayim b'tfusalo means within 4 cubits. If there's 2 within 4 cubits, they're forbidden. Shalosh afilu meruchakot asurot. If it's 3, even farther away, they're going to be forbidden because that's what Rabbi Yishmael says. They make Markulis little ones nearby. But even 2, he says, is forbidden if it's b'tfisalo. Tfisalo is like within arm's reach, which means 4 cubits. Now, remember what we said before. 4 cubits, we explained, is actually only forbidden if it's 3. Three stones. So this seems to go against what we said, and that's why I said we're going to have to fine-tune a little. Amar Rava, again comes Rava to resolve this difficulty. Lo kasha kam b'tfisa achat, kam b'shtei tfisot. What does he say? There's a difference between, now we're going to understand the difference between 2 and 3 a little differently. 2 is going to be forbidden, not if it's within 1.5 amot or something, but if it's within 4 amot, but it's all the same surface level. Okay, we're going to talk about this in a second. If you're going to have the 2 distance, let's say within 4 cubits, but there's a mound in between, which means that if the stones fall, they can't walk over the mound. They're stones, they don't move on their own. So then we're going to assume if there's a mound in the middle, then only if it's 3, because again, what does Rabbi Yishmael hold? 3 might mean they put up a small one, you're the big one. But 2 would mean they're just 2 random stones. They couldn't have fallen from Markulis because they wouldn't have gotten over that mound. And then we're going to see that that's the case that he says 2 are actually forbidden. Okay, that's the Braita we just saw. So now we explained this already, but what is shtei tfisot? That there's something protruding, right, that's blocking it from the stones rolling over to there. Now wait, mini Markulis, we're going to assume 3 stones. Now how did we describe it in the Mishnah? 3 stones lined up in a row. And we're going to assume that's a mini Markulis, according to Rabbi Yishmael. Now, right, ki agavna mihave. Wait a minute, like that's Markulis? V'hatanya doesn't say in a Braita, Eluhen of Beit Kulis. These are the stones of the house of Kulis, which is like Markulis. Echat mikan ve'echat mikan ve'echat al gabehen. One here, one there, and one on top of the two, like a pyramid type thing. So, how could you say this mini Markulis, 3 in a row? That's not the way Markulis looks. So, Amarava Kitanya Ikar Markulis. Okay, so Rava says the main central Markulis is 3 stones in that formation. But when you do the mini one nearby, often people just made it a row, and therefore this would be a problem just as well. Be Yanai Malka Charuv, the house of Yanai, the king, was destroyed. Atu of De Kochavim, so the Gentiles came in there. Ukimu Beit Markulis, and they put up Markulis idol in there. Atu of De Kochavim Acharine, de lo palchin leMarkulis. Now came other Gentiles who didn't worship Markulis. Shaklinu v'chipu b'hem drachim ustrataot. So came these other Gentiles. They took the stones from there and they put them as floors, right, for roads and streets, right, stratiot, strata, streets. Okay, so they basically nullified this avodah zarah. So Ika Rabbanan de Parshe, there were some rabbis who wouldn't walk on those roads because it was used from idol worship. The Ika Rabbanan de Lo Parshe, and there were other rabbis that didn't prevent themselves from walking there because what we would have assumed, it's nullified because other Gentiles came. Remember, Gentiles can nullify the idol of Gentiles. So we're going to have to figure out why the other ones wouldn't walk there. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Benan shel Kedoshim mahalech alehem va'anu nifrosh mehem. So Rabbi Yochanan was very surprised by those people who wouldn't walk there. He said, the son of holy ones, we're going to see who that is in a minute, walks there, and we're not going to walk there? Doesn't make any sense. So now my minhu, Benan shel Kedoshim, who is this person that's the son of holy ones? Rabbi Menachem Rabbi Simai. Now, why was he called the son of holy ones? What made him so unique, and why was he the one brought us the example of, if this person does it, well, all of us can do it. So why did they call him the son of sanctified ones? He wouldn't even look at the form on the image that was engraved onto a coin. That's how careful he was about avodah zarah. So if he's walking on these stones, obviously they were nullified. So now we're going to have to understand the logic behind both positions. My time at demand palish. So what's the reason for the ones who wouldn't walk on those roads? Samarlaki had Amar Rav Gidal Amarav. Remember, this is Rav Gidal. We're going to come back to him. They hold like what Rav Gidal said in the name of Amarav Chia Bar Yosef Amarav. Rav Gidal said in the name of Rav Chia Bar Yosef, who said in the name of Rav. Minayin litikrovet avodah zarah she'en la b'teila olamit. We talked before about nullifying idols. This is not nullifying the idol. This is nullifying something that was offered to the idols. Because remember, they throw the rocks toward the formation. And that's the way they worship it. So it's like a gift given to the idols. Now, the gifts given to the idols can never be nullified. Okay? How do we know this? Shenema, vayitzmedu labal pa'ol, vayochlu zivchei metim. And they call them, like they ate from the offerings to the dead. Now, that means there were offerings they gave to the dead, to the idols, and these are forbidden to us. Now, now a dead body you can never ever benefit from that. Ever. Okay? There's no heter ever to do that. It never becomes nullified or something. It's just forbidden. We're not allowed to benefit from dead bodies. So now we're going to say the fact that they call these zivchei metim, this is one of many drashot we've had from this pasuk, from the comparison to call it zivchei met. If you remember, we learned ohel, for example. There's too much ohel in idols. Also, we're going to learn here that things offered to the idols can never be nullified. And that's why people wouldn't walk on these roads. Okay, so now we have to really understand why were there those who walked on the roads then. Uman de lo parish amar, the ones who wouldn't refrain from walking there, said, Bi'ina ke'em pnim v'leika. Has to be, if you're, okay, now we're going to quote a pasuk. Zoveach le'elohim yecharam, bilti la'Hashem levado. What is offered to the gods has to be cherem. You can't benefit from it at all. Bilti la'Hashem levado. You can only bring offerings to God. From there we learn that the tikrovot of avodah zarah that can never be nullified are only those that have a parallel, this is a very interesting concept, a parallel in the temple, our temple, the way we bring things to God. Now, we don't ever bring stones to God. That's not something we do. So since we don't, right, but what do we bring? We bring sacrifices, animals. So if someone offers an animal sacrifice to an idol, that can never be nullified ever. But stones can be nullified because that's not something that has a parallel by us. And therefore, it's not included in that pasuk. And therefore, it's not cherem. It's not forbidden to be nullified. Amar Rav Yosef bar Abba. So now we're going to see something about this. Okay, Rav Yosef bar Abba says, Ikla Rabba bar Yirmiyah la'atrin. So Rabba, the son of Yirmiyah, came to our city. Va'atav aitim matnita biyade. And he brought a braita with him. And the braita was, Ove kochavim shevi avanim min amarkulis, v'chipa be'em drachim, ustartiaot. Okay, exactly our case. An idol worshiper brings, right, stones from Markulis, and then he uses them to pave the roads. Okay, mutaro, turning out a amabet, they're permitted. And Yisrael shevi avanim min amarkulis, v'chipa be'em drachim, ustartiaot, asuraot. But a Jewish person who brings them and uses them to make roads out of them, it's forbidden because a Jew can't nullify avodah zarah. The late nagar v'lo bar nagar the yifrikina. Now, when he came and he said this, the response was, Rav Yosef bar Abba said, there's no one who can, what's a nagar v'lo bar nagar? There's no, nagar is a carpenter, but really it's like an artisan. There's no artisan, now what they really mean is, the Talmidei Chachamim, the Torah scholars, were artisans with words of Torah. So there's no artisan or son of an artisan, meaning there's no wise person, there's no Talmid Chacham or son of a Talmid Chacham who can explain this. Okay, this is very confusing. So Amar Rav Sheshet, Ana lo nagar ana velo bar nagar ana uparkina le. He says, I don't understand what the problem is. I'm not a Chacham. I'm not the son of a Chacham. Okay, now this is Rav Sheshet. He obviously was. He was being humble. He said, look, I'm no great genius, but I can explain it. Umay kushale. In other words, and what's bothering you about this? In other words, this is very clear. Now, why is it very clear? Because it's what we just said. That the Gentile can nullify this tikrovet because it's not a real tikrovet, right? Because there's no parallel in the temple. So he says, I don't get why it's so difficult. My kushale. What's your problem? Is it because the Rav Gidol? Is it because of what Rav Gidol says? The tikrovet avodah zarah can never be nullified? Be'inan ke'em pnim v'leka. It needs to be done like the inside, right? Like what we do inside the temple, and this one isn't. These stones are never brought, so they actually could be nullified. So there you see the two directions. Obviously, the one who thought it was difficult was struggling with this issue because he said you can't nullify tikrovet avodah zarah, and that went like one side, but we saw the other side also, and that's the side that Rav Sheshet chose, which said, I don't even know what's so difficult about this. Now we're going to have another similar situation, totally different topic. And this is going to take us almost all to the end of the daf. Amar Rav Yosef bar Abba, same situation. Rav Yosef bar Abba is there. He says, Ikla Rabba bar Yirmiyah la'atrin. Rabba bar Yirmiyah came to the city. And he brought a braita with him. And then in the braita he said, Matli'in umezahamim b'shvi'it, ve'em matli'im umezahamim b'mo'ed. Okay, so now he said that there's things that we could do on the, just one second, I want to check one thing. He said there's things that we can do. There's differences between what you're allowed and not allowed to do in the Shemitah year. And there's also differences between what you're allowed and not allowed to do on Chol HaMoed. Now, in both cases, you're really not allowed to work. There's a little bit of a difference of, right, one is working the land, one is working, and we're going to see what exactly the differences are. Okay, this is what I wanted to check. I'm just going to go back. In both stories now, we have Rav Yosef bar Abba tells the story of Rabba bar Yirmiyah when he came to the city. Rabba bar Yirmiyah, in both cases, he was the one, I said Rav Yosef, but it's really Rabba bar Yirmiyah was the one who brought the braita, and that he himself said, not Rav Yosef, he himself said, I don't understand this, okay? There's no one who can really explain this properly, okay? So I just wanted to check that. Going to the commentary here, anyway, it was he himself, Rabba bar Yirmiyah. After bringing the braita, he said this braita makes no sense. Okay, so let's go on. So now we're going to have the same situation where he's going to bring a braita, and after he brings the braita, he says this braita makes no sense. Now this time, We're going to have a very long while till we can figure out what did it make sense, because it seems pretty clear. Okay, and we're going to suggest 5 different possibilities as to what the difficulty is. So that's what's coming up right now. So again, Rav Yosef Bar Abba says, Rabbi Bar Yirmiyah came and he brought this Braita with him, and in the Braita he talked about 2 actions. We're going to see even more. In the beginning he talked about 2 actions. One is matzli'im, taking worms out of trees that are eating through the trees, and mizahamim, which is sticking fertilizer onto the tree to make the tree healthier, like when there's something wrong with the tree. You can do those things in the Shemitah year. But ein matzli'im u'mazahamim b'moed, but you can't do it on Chol HaMoed. Now we don't yet know why, we'll get there soon. Kan v'kan, now in both of them, okay, now that's where there's differences. Now we're going to talk about similarities. In both Shemitah and Chol HaMoed, ein migazmim, you can't trim the trees. V'sachin shemen ligazum, right? Now, by the way, why do you prune the trees? To help them grow better. So you can't do that. That's work, and that helps the stuff grow properly in the Shemitah year. Sachin shemen legazum, but what you can do is you can put oil on. If something was cut and it's going to dry out, you can put oil on it, bein b'moed, bein b'shvi, whether it's Chol HaMoed, whether it's in the Shemitah year. Now, the general things that are permitted in these cases that's usually similar about these 2 is what we call davar ha'aved. If it will get ruined and you'll have a huge loss down the road, will allow you to do it both on the holiday and in the Shemitah year. So again, gizum is just to make the tree grow better. That you're not allowed to do. But to fix a tree that's sick or that's going to dry out, you're allowed to do that. Ein megazmim v'sachim shemen legazum. Sorry, I just lost. Okay. V'leit nagar v'lo bar nagar di'ufrikin. And then he says, and there's no chacham or ben tamid chacham who can explain this to me and could explain this difficult. Now he doesn't say what's difficult. Ravina is going to come along and say, I don't understand what was difficult. If it was this, he's going to suggest 5 different explanations. Okay, he's going to suggest 4, and each time he gets to the 4, he's going to say, maybe this is it, maybe that's it, maybe that's it. And then each time he's going to say, but that's not difficult, I can explain that. Okay, so we purposely didn't explain this so well because we're going to see as he goes through. So Amar Ravina, Ana lo nagarana, velo bar nagarana, same kind of response that Rav Sheshet had to the previous. Look, I'm no Talmid Chacham, I'm not the son of a Talmid Chacham. Umerfakin ala, but I can explain this. My kakashile, what do you think was difficult? And if you're going to say it's this, I'll explain it like that. And if you're going to say that, I'll explain it. He's going to go through it. So he starts off with the first. Let's take the first part of the Braita. We have 2 things, matliim umazamim, that are you can do on the Shemitah year, but you can't do them on the Moed. Okay, so again, taking out the worms and putting on the fertilizer. So he says, midami, they're Shvi and Moed are not really identical, and it's pretty clear what the difference is. Shvi malacha asar rachmana, tircha shari. In the Shnata Shemitah, what's important that you don't do an action that's forbidden. But we don't care if you work hard. It's not like Shabbat or holiday where you're not allowed to work hard. Like Chol HaMoed, the holy days, we don't want you working hard on Chol HaMoed. That's why all sorts of things are forbidden, right? You can do certain melachot, but there's other things that are forbidden so that you don't work hard. Moed, afilu tircha nami asir, right? But on the Moed, even tircha is forbidden. So this isn't really malach of working the land, because what you're really trying to do is prevent your tree from, it is work, but you're trying to prevent your tree from future damage. And therefore, we're going to allow it because it's not much of because even though it's a tircha, it's hard work, no such problem on Shemitah of doing hard work. But on the Chol HaMoed, even though it's preventing the tree from getting damaged, but it's a tircha, and we don't want you to work so hard on Chol HaMoed. Okay, so that didn't work. So now, remember, Matzli'im, Mizamim, Shvi versus Moed. Now we're going to go back to Mizahamim on the Shemitah year. And we're going to say, Ella, maybe what he was saying was, Ella zihum agizum kakashele. Now, if you look at part 1 and part 2 of the Braita, in part 1 we had Matzli'im u'mazamim, or Ematli'im u'mazamim. One was Shvi, it was permitted. One is the Moed, it wasn't. Now let's ignore the Moed for now. Second option is, maybe within Shemitah we don't understand. Why in the Shemitah year do we say, yes, you can do Mazahamim, but no Emegazmim? Maybe that's his difficulty. Why did it then say, you can't do Gizum even on the Shemitah year? Ma'ishna zihum deshari, ma'ishna zihum deshari, ma'ishna gizum de'aser. Why can you put the fertilizer on the tree, but you can't prune it? So again, he says, midame. Those clearly aren't the same. And I already explained this. Zihum ukume ilanu shari. The zihum is to prevent the tree from dying, and that's permitted. Gizum ivruya ilana v'aser. The gizum is to make the tree grow better. That's why you prune it. So it grows, it's healthier. You want shevach, you want extra stuff to happen. That's for sure forbidden in the Shemitah year. Okay, so option 2 didn't work either. Ella zihuma zihum kakashile. Now what we're going to do is we're not going to say his contradiction was in the Braita itself, and the next 2 suggestions are going to be his contradiction is the Braita with another Braita. So now we're going to start with zihum. The zihum, which we started from the beginning, that you can do zihum on Shemitah, that's what's difficult, because the Katane says in our Braita that we just read, Matzli'im Muzamim B'Shvit, you can do it. Urimini, but that contradicts the following source. Mizahamim et hanitiot, v'korchin otam v'kotmim otam, v'osim lahem batim, u'mashkim otam, ad Rosh Hashanah. This source talks about all sorts of things you can do. It's a Mishnah in Shvi'it, which is all about Shemitah, up till Rosh Hashanah of the Shemitah year. In other words, in the 6th year, you can do it. There's a number of things you can't do even 30 days before. But these actions you can do up until Rosh Hashanah, but not beyond Rosh Hashanah, not in the Shemitah year. And notice the first one on the list, Mizahamim, okay, the nitiot. These are saplings. You can, if you have a little sapling that's growing, you're allowed to work and deal with that sapling just up until the Shemitah year starts. And you can do the zihum, which seems to go against what we just read, which is you can't do zihum on Shemitah. You can do zihum on Shemitah, and this says you can't. You can only do it leading up to the Shemitah year. Okay, korchinotam, which is you put like a cloth around it to protect it from the sun. Komtinotan, okay, kutminotam. Some people think this is pruning it. Some people think this means to put ashes on it that they did for some reason. Vosin lahem batim. You can also do protective kind of things around it to protect it from cold or heat. And mashkinotam, and you can water them. Now you're allowed to water in Shemitah, but not overwater them. Like you can only do what basic needs. This is like watering a lot until Rosh Hashanah. So again, Rosh Hashanah im b'shvi lo. It sounds like you can't do it in the Shemitah year, and that goes against our source. So they say no, that's not a problem either. Ravina says. V'dilma kid Rav Ukvar bar Chama. Maybe this can be understood like Rav Ukvar bar Chama. The Amar Rav Ukvar bar Chama. Trei kishkushe have. There's 2 types of actions you can do. Chad lavruye ilana v'asil. V'chad l'situme pili ushare. So sticking on this fertilizer has 2 different functions depending on the situation. Sometimes you're doing it to make the tree better, okay, to improve the way the tree grows. That's the source we just quoted that's going to be forbidden. Our source, which is permitted, is l'situme pile. That's if you have like dried out things and you're worried it's going to dry out and get ruined. Then you're allowed to put the fertilizer on to protect it from getting ruined. Okay, we see the same themes over and over again. So now, he said this specifically about kishkushe, which was actually, kishkushe, Rashi explains, is digging near under the olive tree. Okay, a certain type of digging that they would do to either, again, improve the tree or prevent it from dying. And hachanami, likewise here, we could say, trezi amume have chalu kume ilana yishare, chalivri ilana v'aser. Okay, what they're doing here is they're saying, this was an answer given in a different situation. They explained already there were 2 different ways of doing it, depending on the scenario, the situation. Likewise here, in other words, one action could be, depending on the way the tree is, could be protecting the tree from dying, or it could be actually improving the tree. So again, as long as we stay within the realm of preventing the tree from dying, it's going to be permitted. If not, it's going to be forbidden. And that's this distinction between the 2 Braita. They're talking about different situations. That was option 3. That didn't work either. Option 4, which as you know already, is not going to work either. We're almost at the answer. Ela sicha asicha kakashile. So now we're going to do a similar thing that we just did, but with a different line in the Mishnah, in the Braita. We're going to say, this line in the Braita contradicts a different source. So, Dikatani, it says in our Braita, Sachin shemen legazum, bein b'moed, bein b'shvit. If something was cut, and you want to put oil on it to prevent it from drying out, you're allowed to do it, whether it's Shemitah year or whether it's the holiday. Urimini, and this contradicts another source, particularly about Shemitah again. Sachin et hapagin, okay, if you have unripe fruit, you can put olive oil on them, or oil on them. Uminakvim umifatmim otam ad Rosh Hashanah. and you can do some other actions, like you can make this hole in them that they did for some reason. I don't remember what this was for. And mifatamim matam, you can fatten them up until Rosh Hashanah, but not past Rosh Hashanah. You can't do it on the Shemitah year. So what do you see? You can't do sicha on the Shemitah year, right? Rosh Hashanah ein b'shvi lo. It sounds like once you get to Shnat Shemitah, though, you can't do it, and that contradicts the Braita. So again, they say same thing. Midame hacha ukimui ilana ushare hatam pitume pere va'aser. In our case, you're doing it to prevent the tree from dying. But in that case, you're just doing it to fatten up these unripe fruits. That's a different story. That's not that they're going to get ruined if you don't put it on. It's to fatten them up. Okay, so Ravina does not succeed. Ravina says, I don't understand. This was Ravina the whole time. I don't understand what was difficult to Rabba Bar Yirmiyah. It seems pretty clear. If this was difficult, we have an answer. If this was difficult, right? The first two were inner contradictions, things that didn't make sense within the Braita itself. The second two were bringing in outside sources and saying perhaps those sources contradict. So we don't have an answer, but I did promise you there will be an answer on number 5. The 5th attempt will work, but it's by somebody else. Amarle Rav Sama Breder Rav Ashi the Ravina. So Rav Sama, the son of Rav Ashi, comes to Ravina and says, I can explain it to you. Bar Yirmiyah, or Rabba Bar Yirmiyah, Sicha de Moed Aziyum de Moed Kakashile, was a difficulty within the Braita itself. What was it? One of the things we didn't compare until now. Sicha, putting this oil on the now we're not on Shemitah anymore, on the Moed. The fact that you could do that on Chol Moed, Azihum de Moed Kakashile. Why are you allowed to put the sicha on, but you can't do the zihum? Now remember, what did we say about the zihum? Why are you putting it on? Why are you allowed to do it in the Shemitah year? Because it's going to ruin the tree. So this is also going to ruin the tree on the holiday. Why are we not allowed to do it on Chol Moed? And yet, we are allowed to put the oil on Chol Moed to prevent it from dying. Right? Michti hayukime v'hayukime, since both of these are trying to keep the tree alive, maishna haydeshari or maishna hada-asr. And Hainu de Ka'amra late Nagar velo bar Nagar di Ferkine. And that's why Rabbi Bar Yirmiyah said, there's no one who can explain this to me. I can't figure it out. And in fact, we don't end up with an answer. Okay, this time, right, last time Rav Shesha came up with an answer. This time we really ended up with no answer. It is hard to understand. If on Chol Moed the tree might die, why are you allowed to put the oil on, but you're not allowed to put the fertilizer on? Left with a question. Now we're going to end with this next sugya, we'll only get started on. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, or we'll kind of finish one section of it anyway. Avodah zarah she'ovdin ota b'makel. If you worship the avodah zarah with a stick. Now this is going to go back to what we said before. Zevach le'Elohim yacharam bilti la'Hashem levado. And from there we learned that things that you're not allowed to benefit from, those are things that we have a parallel in the temple. And we're going to take this a little bit farther now. So Rav Yehuda says in the name of Rav, in avodah zarah that you worship it with a stick, okay, like by breaking a stick or something for the gods, shavar makel b'faneh chayav. Okay, now we're going to see also, it's not just about is it forbidden to benefit from, but is it considered idol worship? So if you break this makel in front of it, chayav, you're going to be liable, the death penalty, because breaking a stick is like, what? Shchita. It's a similar action. You break the stick, it's like you break the neck of the animal. But zarak makel b'faneh, but if you throw a stick, patur. So now, Abaye doesn't really understand why you're going to be exempt there. Amarle Abaye l'Rava, ma'ishna shavar, t'havi lekein zvicha, right? If you break it, it's like slaughtering. Zarak, nami havi lekein zrika. What do you mean? We also do throwing in the Beit HaMikdash. It's not exactly throwing, but we sprinkle blood on the altar, and it's called zrikat adam. So throwing the stick should be the same as zrikat dam. We're going to see in a minute why it's quite different. I mean, you could also distinguish between slaughtering an animal and breaking a stick, but there's something very similar about it. But we're going to see, when it comes to sprinkling the blood, this is really not so similar. So they're going to, Amar Le, Rava answers him, Be'ina zrika mishtaberet v'leika. What happens to blood when you pour it? That's why I said sprinkle it really, because it starts dripping little by bit and the blood separates. All the different particles kind of separate from each other. That doesn't happen when you throw a stick. You throw a stick, the stick is still the same stick. When you sprinkle the blood trickles down. So it's not really similar. So, ATV. Abaye brings a question on Rav, and he says, Sfat latzoa. Okay, this could be a difficult sugya to see. Okay, sfat latzoa. If you feed the gods, the idol, feces. Or you poured a libation of urine. Okay, sounds pretty gross. Chayav, you're liable. So bishlama avichal meimei raglayim, because rika mishtaberet. We get it with the urine because it's like, I'm just going to continue a little bit more and finish this up. It's like the blood; it trickles down. But elat tzoah ma'izrika mishtaberika, but it doesn't happen to tzoah. It doesn't start breaking up. To which the Gemara answers, well, end in a very unpleasant place. Bitzoah lecha, with wet, liquidy feces. We're talking about. Then it would be more similar to the blood. And that then you would be liable the death penalty for doing it because that would have this parallel in the temple. Very pleasant. Okay, so what did we do today? We started with this machlokah Rabbi Yishmael and the rabbis. We tried to understand in what case do they really deliberate, right? In the end, we ended up with this mound in between. And then, right, when the stones definitely came from Markulis, we're going to say it's forbidden. It's just a matter of when it's nearby, but over a mound, right? Rabbi Yishmael will say, well, if it's 3, we'll assume a little one goes near a big one, and that was its own mound. The rabbis will say, no, the Markulis is there, the rocks are there, they didn't come from there, and there's no small Markulis next to a big one. People didn't do that, so we're just going to assume these are 3 random stones, and they're actually not forbidden to benefit from. Then we had the story of Yanai HaMelech, where they took the stones from the, right, first his house was destroyed, they put in Markulis in there, and then other ones came and said, oh, we don't pray to Markulis, and they took them and made streets out of them. And then we had a whole thing about how people wouldn't walk on the streets, but some people will walk on the streets. And then we talked about the Tikrovet Lavodah Zarah, and how, right, some people say Tikrovet, right, it was Batel, but other people say, no, it's not Batel, unless, right, that it is Batel. Others say, no, you can't do Beetle for a Tikrovet if it was done similarly in the temple in that way. And this isn't, right, so, sorry, some people said Tikrovet can never be Batel, and that's why it's not. And other people say, no, Tikrovet that can be Batel are only the ones that are done when it's done in the temple in that way. But this is not an animal that was slaughtered in the temple, it's parallel, could have been slaughtered in the temple. This is stones that we don't have such a thing that we bring stones on an offering, and therefore it's different. From there, we got into this, right? We got into the story of Rav Sheshet and Rabbi Yirmiyah that came, and then another time Rabbi Yirmiyah came and had a different issue with the Shvid and the Moed, and we had 5 different ways of trying to figure out what was so difficult for him until we finally figured it out, and then really didn't have an answer for his difficulty. And then we ended with this idea of the same issue of you're liable for the death penalty if you do something where there's a parallel you do for other gods in a way that there's a parallel by us. And what is that? We talked about what's similar to Shechita and what's similar to Zrika, and in what ways does it have to be similar to blood, and that's what we discussed, all the trickling down. With that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a good day.